My wife, Iris, sat on the couch next to me, holding the bowl of popcorn in her thin hands. On her other side, our little boy, Freddie, Saturday. He looked just like his mother, with the same dirty blonde hair and faraway eyes, like the eyes of a dreamer. The movie played across our flat-screen TV, some CGI comedy featuring talking penguins and llamas that could drive cars. It was some Disney garbage I would never have watched in a million years, but Freddie liked it, so I suffered through it for him. We had turned off all the lights in the house for the movie. Only the TV's flickering colors illuminated the room, sending dancing shadows that flashed out behind us. Suddenly, outside the living room window, a bolt of lightning came down from the sky, splitting a tree in our front yard in two. Light flooded in through the window as if the flash of a nuclear missile were ripping its way across the town. A crash rang out as the tree split down the middle, its massive branches tumbling down onto the lawn. I jumped as the ground shook. More lightning flashed nearby, hitting other houses and lawns on the street. Damn, there wasn't supposed to be any storm, I said in surprise. The TV had gone black, and now we sat in darkness. For a long moment, I thought the power had gone out. Abruptly, it came back on with a roar of white noise and a flickering of static. The volume seemed to be increasing by itself, growing into a rushing cacophony like a waterfall. I saw Iris try to scream something, but I could only see her lips move. As suddenly as it all started, it stopped. The standard "Please stand by" screen with a rainbow of blocky colors appeared. There was a clanging, ringing sound that emanated from the speakers, high-pitched and whining, like tinnitus. Then text started appearing across the screen. At the same time, a deep, serious voice spoke in the background, like a radio announcer reporting on the death of a president. "This is the Demon Emergency Alert Broadcast System," the voice read grimly. "This is not a test. Level 5 activity has been reported in your area. Do not go outside, close all blinds, shutters, and windows. Lock all doors and close any attached garages. Do not open your doors except to military or police personnel with the proper insignia, even if someone appears to be in distress. Do not open your door to investigate or try to interfere in any way. A temporary quarantine is in effect for your area. Military and police assistance is on the way. To ensure the greatest chances of survival during this time of crisis, please abide by the following rules. Rule 1. If blood begins to pour under your door, go to a higher floor immediately. Avoid physical contact with the blood at all costs. Rule 2. All legitimate military and police personnel will have a special insignia on their helmets and jackets, an eye contained in a double-thumbed fist. Only accompany them if they have this insignia, otherwise, they are imposters. Rule 3. Avoid mirrors for the duration of the emergency. The voice cut out abruptly, slowing down in a mechanical whine. Static started flashing across the TV, covering the "Please stand by" message that had returned in blocky letters. At that moment, the lights went out. They came back on a couple of seconds later, brightening and dimming before the power failed again. This time, the electricity did not come back on. "What the?" Iris whispered next to me, taking out her phone and shining the light across the dark living room. "That was pretty weird. Everything looks different outside, too. I was just outside an hour ago, and the moon didn't look anything like that," she pointed. I got up, realizing she was right. The nighttime sky outside looked strange. I looked out the front window, seeing the moon cast in a fluorescent orange light. The cloudless sky had a dark red tint. It as if some kind of eerie smog had covered everything. I had seen similar things happen after massive forest fires in the past. "What happened, Dad?" Freddie asked in his small voice. "Where's the movie?" "I think we lost power, little man," I said, ruffling his hair in a nonchalant manner. I didn't really believe the emergency broadcast. After all, I figured some teenager had hacked the TV station and decided to play a prank, or perhaps some disgruntled employee had done it on his last day as a kind of screw you to the station. I had heard of similar things happening before. It was somewhat strange how the power had gone out and the sky had changed, but I felt sure that it could all be logically explained. Someone shrieked outside. I looked out onto the dark street, seeing the silhouette of someone running frantically down the middle of the street, zigzagging wildly. As the figure got closer, I realized it was a young woman. She looked like she was in her mid-20s. She wore a white shirt and khakis, her clothes soaked in streams of blood that made the fabric cling to her trembling body. I saw a vicious gash bitten into her left shoulder, a wound so deep that the white bone peeked out through the ragged patches of flesh. "Help me!" she wailed, her eyes wild and panicked. "Why won't anyone help me?" She staggered and fell forward, crying and bleeding all over the road. I was about to run outside to see what was wrong with the young woman when I saw another silhouette creeping up behind her. It looked like the body of a man, but something was wrong. As he drew closer, I caught a glimpse of the man's face through the dim light. The left side of it was rotted and decayed, while the right looked muscular and healthy. He wore a black suit that looked like little more than tatters. Pieces of it fell off in ragged strips. I could see his left hand was also decomposing. Whatever kind of sickness it was, it seemed to extend to the whole left side of his body. The stiff, skeletal leg cracked as he dragged it behind him, silently drawing nearer to the young woman. The living side of his face split into an insane, gruesome grin as he looked down at her. He carried a blood-stained axe that dragged on the pavement behind him with a harsh, metallic groan. "Get away from me!" the woman screamed at the abomination, trying to kick at him. But she looked weakened from blood loss, and her attempts were feeble and slow. The man laughed, a sound that rang out like the gurgling of blood. He spat squirming maggots from his mouth onto the dark street below. He knelt down before the gasping woman and gave a low whisper. It carried on the dead silent air. "So warm," he murmured, wiping his dead, putrefying fingers across the streams of blood that spurted from her left shoulder. He stuck an inhumanly long, pointed tongue out of his chattering lips and began to lick the blood off his hands. But not enough, not nearly enough. He stuck the bony, decaying fingers of his left hand into the wound and started pulling at the ragged wound. Blood bubbled out in increasing quantities, covering her body in its wet sheen. The woman jerked, her face turning pale and bloodless. She tried to kick at him, but he only laughed again, gurgling like a man with a slit throat. In horror, I watched him raise the axe above his head. It stood there for a long moment, trembling in his shaking hands like a guillotine blade. "Please don't," the woman pleaded as he grinned down at her. In a blow, he swung the axe down into her forehead. There was a wet cracking of bone and a ringing of metal. She sat there with her mouth open for what felt like a very long moment, then limply, she collapsed to the pavement. A dull thud echoed down the street as her skull smacked the pavement. Sickened, I closed the blinds on the window and turned away, realizing that Freddie and Iris had been standing right behind me the entire time, watching the horrific display. Freddie was crying quietly into his hands, while Iris looked pale, her green eyes wide and unbelieving. The woman exhaled one last time, a long, drawn-out death gasp, and then everything went silent. I felt sick and weak. Staggering, I put my hand out against the wall as a wave of nausea rose up in my stomach. I ran towards the bathroom, shining the light from my cell phone to light the way. Iris started crying. I heard her frantically try to dial 911 over and over again. "Damn it, nothing's working," she cried. I stumbled into the bathroom and threw up all the popcorn and soda I had consumed that night into the toilet. Covered in sweat, I started wiping my face with toilet paper. I pushed myself up, glancing into the mirror. A cadaverous version of myself stood there, the dead face showing horror and surprise, just like my own. I saw the same high cheekbones, the same shaved head, but in the mirror image, maggots writhed and squirmed in the rancid flesh. I backpedaled into the wall, stuttering something incomprehensible. The reflected image did the same, his lipless mouth opening and closing with silent curses. He wore the same clothes as myself, a black t-shirt and blue jeans, but they were rotted and tattered, as if they had been dug out of a grave. "What the?" I swore, raising my right hand experimentally. The mirror image did the same, matching every single movement perfectly. At that moment, Iris came running into the bathroom, her soft footsteps thudding gently against the marble floor. I jumped, turning to her. "There's someone outside the door," she whispered, her face pale. I glanced back at the reflection, seeing that the other version was no longer following my movements. "Watch out!" I cried, but it was too late. The skull-like face came forward in a blur, his arm shot out towards Iris. The surface of the mirror swirled as if it were made of water. When his pale flesh made contact with it, the sharp points of bone of his fingers wrapped around Iris's neck. Stunned and silent, I watched in horror as he started dragging her into that other world. "Stop him!" she screamed. "God, make him stop!" I ran forward, grabbing her legs as her head and chest were sucked through. There was a slight popping sound when her body entered the liquid-like surface. I tried to hold on with all of my strength, but whatever abomination was on the other side was strong, stronger than me. His iron grip yanked her out of my hands. "Dad?" Freddie asked, slinking into the bathroom. His eyes were wide and wild. He looked around, confused. "Where's Mom? Who's screaming?" I had to make a decision instantly. I knew I could either stay with my son or try to get my wife back. I knew I couldn't just leave Iris, though I felt mentally torn. I looked between him and the mirror, my heart quivering with anxiety. "Freddie, go wait in the living room," I said. "Hide behind the couch. Don't answer the door or say anything to anyone, no matter what. I'll be right back." I wasn't sure if I would be or not. Before I turned to the mirror, I patted his head. "Remember the rules they read us on the TV?" He nodded, but he was only a 7-year-old boy. How much did he really understand? Hell, how much did I even understand? I hadn't followed the rules, and now Iris was kidnapped. I turned back to the mirror, seeing that I had no reflection now. There was no sign of Iris or the rotted corpse with my face either. Slowly, I walked forward, putting my trembling hand out towards its silvery surface. My fingers went through the mirror as if it were mere air, but I felt something freezing cold ripple around my skin. Pins and needles rushed up my arm. Taking a deep breath, I pushed myself up on the counter and went all the way through. I fell forward onto the marble surface of the bathroom floor, putting my hands out to break the fall. As I glanced up, I realized how strange everything looked. The world here was in constant motion, as if a fog-like void shimmered. The overwhelming urge to go back as her screams filled the air. The world around me felt like it was closing in, the shadows swirling with an intensity that seemed almost alive. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back into the darkened bathroom, struggling to process the nightmare unfolding before me. The floor's surface danced with whirls of shadow that felt as freezing cold as liquid nitrogen as they passed over my body. Shivering and hugging myself, I pushed off the floor. The walls and ceilings too rippled in the same black currents. I glanced around, seeing the white bathtub filled to the brim with dark blood. It bubbled constantly as if someone were drowning under its surface. Bloody handprints of all sizes smeared the sides of the tub. The smell of copper grew strong, mixing with the strange smell that emanated from the shadows, a pungent chemical odor, like ammonia. I passed by the mirror, seeing that here too I had no reflection. I felt like a vampire staring into that blank emptiness, feeling sick and disoriented. I stumbled forward, afraid to even breathe too loudly. I heard Iris crying and shrieking somewhere nearby. "No, please stop," she wailed. Her voice seemed to be growing fainter and weaker, as if she were being dragged away by a tsunami. I peeked around the corner. Everything looked nightmarish and strange. The living room looked much longer, stretching out for hundreds of feet. It had the same blue carpet and white walls as the one in my world, but now it was the size of a football stadium. The dark red couch had lengthened to an absurd size, stretching wide enough to fit 100 people on it. The TV loomed across the room like the screen of a movie theater. It flickered constantly, showing a cacophony of white noise and static, interspersed with horrible images, naked corpses with their throats sliced from ear to ear, burning bodies, people falling to their deaths from burning buildings. But none of that was what made an involuntary gasp of horror rise up my throat. It was the enormous spiderweb spanning the length of the ceiling, floating softly in the breeze. In the center of the symmetrical web, I saw Iris, covered in silky thread up to her neck. She was hanging horizontally, facing down, her body parallel to the floor. She struggled against the webbing that bound her like steel chains, her eyes bulged from her head as she stared fixedly at the cadaver approaching her. Crawling upside down towards Iris was the monstrous image of myself I had seen in the mirror, but he had transformed into something spidery and eldritch. He skittered along with 4 arms and 4 legs now. The emaciated limbs poked out of his tattered rags of clothes, forked and elongated, the skin pale and covered in purple sores and deep gashes. Iris continued to plead and shriek in horror as it drew near. The creature's chattering fangs and blackened gums approached her neck. At the penultimate moment, Iris saw me peeking around the corner of the bathroom. I stood there, unsure of what to do. I thought of trying to scream out, to throw something at the creature, but then what? We would both die, and then who would be left alive to protect Freddy? I didn't know what to do. These thoughts passed through my head in the space of a single moment as we stared at each other. Her eyes shone with a moment of clarity, even as waves of mortal terror shook her body like a hurricane. "Save Freddy!" she screamed. "Run, Jack!" The creature noticed her staring at me. Instantly, he curved his long neck and twisted his spidery limbs, clutching the thick strands of silk with his skeletal limbs. The creature turned to me. He had a face like a skull, his filmy eyes regarded me intently. Silver streams of saliva dripped from his mouth. He gave a wide, insane smile, then turned back to Iris, unhinging his jaw. The pale, dead skin tore with a wet ripping sound. The yellow, sharp points of teeth gleamed darkly in the currents of rippling shadow. I turned, sprinting back into the darkness of the bathroom as the crunching of bone and the shrieking of my wife followed me out. I had to repress the overwhelming urge to go back as her screams filled the air, dripping from my wounds. "Freddy!" I called out again, desperation mounting as the terror of the situation fully took hold. My gaze flicked back to the shattered bathroom door. The monstrous figure, my cadaverous doppelganger, lurched forward, its shattered jaw hanging grotesquely. I sprinted towards the front door, the sound of my own heart pounding loud in my ears, mingling with the static-filled cries of what sounded like my son. "Dad, please, let me in. They're going to get me." The voice was distorted, filled with static and desperation. Outside, the moon cast a dark red glow that painted the world in a sinister light, intensifying my fear. I peered into the darkness, searching for any sign of Freddy, but the shadowed front yard offered no trace of him. "Where are you?" I screamed into the void, my voice breaking with panic. At that moment, the cadaverous creature surged from the broken bathroom doorway, a grotesque parody of hide and seek turning into a nightmarish chase. His elongated fingers scraped along the hallway walls, leaving marks in the paint as he moved with unnatural speed. Realizing the front door wouldn't hold much longer and with nowhere left to run, I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a lamp, and hurled it at the approaching figure. The lamp smashed against its head with a crack, briefly stunning it. Seizing the moment, I lunged forward, slamming my shoulder against the front door, flinging it open. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stumbled outside, calling for Freddy once more, my eyes scanning the eerie, crimson-lit landscape for any sign of him. The voice continued to call out, a ghostly echo in the static-filled air. "Dad, I'm here. Help me." I followed the voice, my feet slipping on the wet grass as I rounded the corner of the house. There, I finally spotted Freddy, crouched under the window, his body trembling as he looked up at me with wide, terror-filled eyes. "Come on!" I yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him up. We raced back towards the front door, but as we approached, the cadaverous figure emerged again, blocking our path with a twisted grin. Panicked, I glanced around, searching for any alternative. Spotting the garage to our left, I tugged Freddy's arm and darted toward it, slamming the button to open the garage door. The mechanical whir of the door offered a momentary distraction, allowing us to slip inside just as the creature reached out with its gnarled fingers. Inside the garage, I quickly shoved anything I could find in front of the door leading into the house, a toolbox, old paint cans, anything heavy. Freddy clung to me, his small body shaking. "We need to find a way out," I whispered, my mind racing. The creature's relentless pursuit seemed driven by a malevolent intent that was almost personal, as if it wouldn't stop until it had claimed us both. Looking around the cluttered garage, I spotted the old family car, dusty and mostly unused but hopefully still functional. I hurriedly ushered Freddy into the passenger seat, jumping into the driver's side and jamming the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared to life. As I backed the car out of the garage, the creature appeared at the garage door window, its face pressing against the glass, leaving a smear of its decaying flesh. Its eyes locked on mine, a silent vow that this was not the end. Flooring the gas pedal, I steered the car onto the street, away from our home and the nightmarish events that had unfolded. Behind us, the house receded into the darkness, swallowed up by the night as we sped away, the uncertain safety of distance our only solace. "Dad, where are we going?" Freddy's voice was small, filled with the residue of fear and confusion. "Away from here," I answered, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Somewhere safe." As we drove, the red moon watched, a silent witness to our escape, its crimson gaze a stark reminder of the night's horrors. But for now, we were together, alive, and on the move, away from the nightmare, into the unknown. Me as I struggled against the grip of the serpentine creature. With every ounce of my strength, I tried to pull away, the fear for both my life and Freddy's fueling my desperate attempts. The snake's body was thick and cold, its scales scraping against my skin as it tightened its hold. "Freddy, hold on. I'm coming," I shouted, managing to grab a loose floorboard from the hallway with my free hand. With a swift, forceful motion, I smashed it against the snake. The creature recoiled slightly, loosening its grip just enough for me to wriggle free. I lunged forward, grabbing Freddy by the arms and pulling him out of the blood-filled pool. The snakes seemed to sense our struggle and increased their efforts. More of them began to emerge from the blood, their bodies slick and glistening under the dim light, eyes glowing an ominous red. We were surrounded, the hissing and slithering sounds growing louder as they closed in on us. Holding Freddy tightly, I kicked at the snakes, trying to clear a path to the attic stairs. Every step was a battle as more creatures wrapped around our legs, their bites sharp and painful. The blood made the floor slick, and with each step, it was harder to maintain our balance. "We need to keep moving, Freddy. Just a little further," I encouraged him, my voice strained with effort and fear. Freddy, sobbing and terrified, clung to me as I reached up and pulled the cord to lower the attic stairs. The stairs unfolded with a creak, and without hesitation, I hoisted Freddy up, pushing him onto the steps. I quickly followed, kicking away another snake that tried to follow us up. Once we were both on the stairs, I pulled the cord, and the stairs began to retract, lifting us away from the nightmare below. In the attic, the air was stifling, but it was free from the snakes and the rising blood. I set Freddy down, both of us breathing heavily, our clothes soaked and stained. Freddy clung to me, his small body shaking uncontrollably. "It's okay, we're safe now," I reassured him, though the certainty in my voice was more for his benefit than my own. The attic was cramped and filled with old boxes and forgotten belongings, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just escaped. We moved further into the attic, finding a corner where we could hide. I wrapped my arms around Freddy, trying to offer him some comfort as he whimpered softly. The sounds of the creatures below continued, their hisses and the splashing of blood a constant, horrifying reminder of the danger just a floor away. "We just need to stay here until help arrives," I whispered, more to myself than to Freddy. The reality was grim. We were trapped, with no clear way out and no assurance that help would ever come. But in that moment, all I could do was hold my son close, protect him with my body and hope against hope for a miracle. As we sat in the dim light of my phone, the sounds from below eventually began to fade, replaced by a silence that was almost as terrifying. The weight of our situation settled around us, a heavy blanket of uncertainty and fear. But despite everything, I held Freddy closer, determined to keep him safe, no matter what horrors lay in wait below. As the helicopter lifted off, the roar of its blades momentarily drowned out the haunting memories of the night's terror. I held Freddy close, his small form shivering against the chill that had nothing to do with the air. Below us, the town receded into a tableau of devastation, a grim reminder of the nightmare we had just escaped. The floodlit scenes unfolded like a dystopian nightmare come to life, with SWAT teams navigating the blooded streets, rescuing what few they could. The reality that Iris was gone settled in my chest like a stone, her last screams echoing in my ears, a visceral reminder of the cost of my choices. The masked man's words replayed in my mind, "No one knows about this. No one but you two and our group. The media won't say, they do what we tell them." It was a chilling thought that such horrors could be hidden from the world, that such a nightmarish reality could be cordoned off as if it were just another disaster zone. As we ascended higher, the town became a mere speck, its chaos obscured by distance but not diminished in my mind. Freddy leaned against me, his small voice breaking the heavy silence. "Dad, will we be okay now?" I squeezed him tighter, looking down at his wide, frightened eyes, reflecting the floodlights that had saved us. "Yes, we'll be okay," I whispered, though the assurance was more hope than a conviction. "We're together, and that's what matters." The helicopter veered towards the horizon, leaving behind the wreckage of what was once a peaceful town. The ride was quiet, save for the thumping of the rotors and the occasional murmur of the SWAT team communicating over their radios. Each thud seemed to drive home the finality of the night's events, each beat a reminder of Iris, of the life we had lost and the new reality we faced. Settling into the uneasy silence, I looked out at the dark sky, the stars obscured by the lingering smoke of burning homes. My mind replayed the events, each decision, each moment leading up to Iris's death. Guilt gnawed at me, a constant ache that mirrored the physical wounds that marked my body. As the helicopter carried us towards an uncertain future, I realized that the journey ahead would be one of healing and atonement. I needed to rebuild, not just for my sake, but for Freddy's. He needed a father, now more than ever, and I needed to be the man Iris had loved, the man she had believed in. Freddy eventually fell asleep, his head resting against my chest, his breathing steady and calm despite the chaos we had fled. Watching him sleep, I promised silently that I would find a way to make things right, to protect him from any further horrors and to ensure that the shadows of our past did not cloud our future. As the first light of dawn began to edge the horizon, painting it with hues of hope, I allowed myself to believe that we might just find a way through the darkness. After all, we had survived the night, and now, with each passing moment, we were moving not just away from a place, but towards a new beginning. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, as a family, however diminished and forever changed.